Welcome to Detailed, an original podcast by RCAT. This is a show where we uncover lessons learned to help you navigate your next project. I'm Cherise Lakeside, Senior Spec Writer at RDH Building Science, and your host. My guest today is Brett Baba, Principal/Founder at Graham Baba Architects based in Seattle, Washington. Brett is a native of Washington State and attended the University of Washington with a Bachelor of Arts in Environmental Design and a Master of Architecture. Brett has worked at several architectural firms in Washington, New York, and Connecticut since 1978, most notably at Olson Sundberg, where Brett met Jim Graham, and they formed Graham Baba Architects in 2006. The building is a 16,500 square foot commercial office/headquarters that serves as a refuge from the surrounding industrial agribusiness landscape. Inspired by an abandoned wood barn, the structural frame of laminated wood buttresses creates a column-free interior faced in floor-to-ceiling glass. Now, let's get into the details. Brett, welcome to Detailed. How are you today?
Well, I'm doing pretty well. We're having a heat wave here in Seattle right now, and I'm managing to stay pretty cool. And, I'm so sick of the long winters that we have that I don't complain about the heat, even when it's 90. So I'm kind of digging it.
I can relate. We are expected to be over 100 today in Portland, and I work from home. So the only room that I actually have air conditioning in is my office. So I kind of live in my office right now while the weather is this hot. But like you, I love our summers, so I try not to do too much complaining.
I heard you folks set a record on Sunday in Portland.
We did. We seem to be doing a lot more of that in recent years. A couple of years ago, it got up to like 116 one day, which was insane. During COVID, I was in Boston visiting my son, and I came home and actually, when I opened my front door, actually had this rush of crazy heat rush out of my house, and my walls were hot.
Oh my!
I'd never seen anything like that before, but not quite that bad now, but we did hit a record. I would say that I pretty much lived in this room all day just to avoid it, but did get out the kiddie pool for a few minutes.
That's perfect.
So I like to start this podcast with an icebreaker question just to get to know you a little bit and, kind of get our groove and our vibe going for the conversation. And I pick a different question for every guest. So your question today is, if you could trade places with anybody for a day, who would it be and why?
Well, I might pick Lionel Messi because I think if I could play soccer that well for one day, it would feel so good. It must be amazing to feel that.
So I take it you're a soccer fan?
Well, I used to play a lot, and I was never any good, but wouldn't it be wonderful to be good and good for one day?
I am a newly minted season ticket holder for the Timbers. And so I am learning how to be I'm a football fan, but I'm learning how to be a soccer fan. So I totally get it. The man is amazing.
Yeah.
Just absolutely amazing.
I'd be here in the country, so that'd be cool.
That would be fun. So we already read your official bio in our intro. So briefly, tell me one interesting thing about you as a human being outside of architecture.
Well, I don't know if it's very interesting, but when I'm not working, my passion is kiteboarding. I had a spinal injury 4 years ago, and it's left me with kind of a bit of a disability in my left foot. So I can't do so many of the outdoors things I used to do, and can't really run or jump anymore. But I can do that. I can kiteboard. So my wife and I go all over the world, actually, looking for wind and beautiful beaches to kite at. Cool.
I don't know, but I think that's pretty interesting. I have to honestly say that I don't think I have ever had one human being tell me they participated in kiteboarding. I've seen it. I know what it is, but I don't know that I've ever, and I'm pretty busy out in the world. I've never met anybody that actually
Hmm.
does that. It looks like a
Well,
blast.
yeah, pretty exciting. I love it.
That's how fun is that? Now I might have to go try it.
Sure.
Let's talk about this project without me saying too much. I love the motivation to make this office headquarters a refuge. Can you explain to me what that means?
Sure. Well, that was really the one of the main goals for the project was to create a refuge. The client is a fruit packing company in Yakima, Washington. And by the way, I grew up in Yakima, so that's partly why I did the project, but I think partly why it came out the way it did. Um, and they have consolidated their operations to um, a campus, for lack of a better word, of about 100 acres in kind of industrial land on the perimeter of Yakima. And there are these state of the art fruit packing and shipping buildings. They're really quite amazing. They're all digital, robotized, amazing. And they're all just classic concrete tilt up, just gray walls, flat roofs, lots of pipes everywhere, lots of asphalt, no landscaping. It's kind of a grim, uh, environment. And
Right.
and the owner said to me, we spend our day in these buildings and walk around these buildings. We want to come back to our office and have it feel like a refuge, like, just get away from that. And to that extent, we don't even want to see those buildings. We want to go to this place and not even know where we are. And so that, of course, was a big driving factor for how the building was, how it ended up. We sunk it down very low. We built earth berms around most of the building. There's a big, huge site wall. There's a big highway that runs next to the site, kind of loud and unpleasant. And so, if you look at the design of the building, there's a very large concrete wall on the north side, and that's buffering from the highway. And that we have earth coming up that wall, so that's all burned. So you're kind of in this earth landscape, kind of a bowl almost, if you will, that just every view is curated. And then if you look across the highway and you look up, you see these beautiful basalt cliffs. They're, classic Eastern Washington landscape, beautiful cliffs. So, by doing that, getting ourselves low and having the berms around us and the landscaping, it forces the eye up over the top, and then, you're really seeing that and not what's down below. So that was really the goal. And then, it means that it's an inwardly focused building, of course. So there's a landscape courtyard in the middle, and, the spaces all look into that. They kind of surround it. So it's very much an inwardly focused building.
Having some familiarity with that industry, I imagine they love it.
I think so. I mean, it's, what they look out onto. We also organized the inside of the building in such a way that all the employees are on the big, there's a 14-foot high glass wall on the north side of the building. They're up against that. And then there are private offices, but they're on the south side. So we kind of gave preferential treatment to the employees. So they're sitting in this beautiful glass wall facing north, looking into the landscape. So, we did our best to create a really lovely working environment for them.
So you, in your project description, you made an architectural reference to an abandoned wood barn. Um, Obviously, I read the description, but I'd like you to tell me, what does that mean?
Yeah. Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about the client. The owner, or one of the owners of the company, Mr. Rick Plath, was the individual that we worked with. His partners, brothers said, "You just do this project. You just get the building built." So it was his responsibility, and he was really our single point of contact. Um, and he's a man of very few words. A typical email from Rick would be 1 to 3 words. I'm not kidding. He doesn't say much. What he does, he's very serious about. And there's an old saying in the industry that the best client is the one that brings the fewest people to a meeting. And so I think that a lot of success of this project is because it was one individual, really working with us, a very small team on our side. So there weren't that many people. So that sort of vision it remained pretty pure out throughout the project. And so, being a man of few words, I said, well, Rick, what do you want this building to be like? You've told me what you don't want. You don't want concrete. You don't want flat roofs, and you don't want industrial. What do you want? And he said, get in the car. So he took me on about a 20-minute drive outside of town. We didn't talk on the trip. And he pulls up to this farm, and he points to this barn, and he says, that's what I like. And I was shocked, like, this? And it was this old barn, kind of decaying. Some of the siding had fallen away. You could see through the building. All the wood was black, but one of the remarkable things to me was you could look inside the building because so much of it was just fallen away, and you could see all the timbers. The timber frame of the building was exposed, and then all those knee braces and all those, wood timber elements that, to me it was like, well, you really understand the forces in a building because when they were built that way, there's such an honest use of these members. There was no engineering calculation done, it was just common sense and understanding what it takes to keep something from tipping over. And I love that about it. I also realized, okay, we're not going to be doing a flat roof. This has a gable. The wood has texture, it has warmth. And so those are kind of were the takeaways. And what that kind of led to for me was thinking about, okay, we're going to do this expressed wood timber frame. That could be really neat. Why don't we make it an exoskeleton? Why don't we express that on the outside of the building? And that led me to thinking about the building as kind of a barn in some state of decay. And so if you kind of look at it from above, it's sort of like, I think of it as like a barn where the middle of it has collapsed and fallen away. And so the building is in L shape. And then, as I said, there's the site wall on one side. So I can kind of imagine that wall being a wall that was still standing. And then these bits of building, like the lunchroom, and, they're still there, but, and some of the timber frame is left, but the walls have fallen away. And then at the locations where things have decayed, that's where we put the glass walls. So, that really, that metaphor for me was pretty strong in terms of, the sort of formation of the site plan and the building massing. So it was cool. It was just like one thing. Most of our clients have Pinterest pages, and we encourage them to show us pictures of things they like, and we'll spend weeks talking about it. This was one example. That's it. So it was wonderful. It's a really interesting experience.
I can't even tell you how much I appreciate a client that can just say,
Yeah.
Obviously he didn't want a building that was falling down, but could give you that vision right out of the gate. Efficiency is kind of my thing. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't do well with those too many cooks in the kitchen meetings and, throwing out idea after idea after idea that really goes no. I mean, I understand you have to do some of that. That's not a problem. But to just have something so clear and concise right out of the chute to start from, I think is amazing.
Yeah. It was super refreshing. This was just so simple and clear. And we didn't have all that many meetings. And he was happy to kind of take the ride with us, on this experimental building, and it turned out how it turned out. So you're right. There's something really refreshing about that approach.
I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this. Listeners, please do not send me any emails. We could use a little bit more of that, I think, in architecture. Um, you know, I think we can be creative, but also be a little bit more thoughtful and common sense, especially in places where you don't have a ton of room to be creative. and you have very strict budgets, and it's okay to make a decision. We can put the pencil down, so to speak, at some point, which I think has become harder and harder as technology has moved from actually putting a pencil down to being able to change things in seconds over and over again. So
Mhm.
yeah, you can tell your client I'm seriously impressed. Let's get a little more technical about this building. Let's start with the exterior, which is fantastic, by the way. Tell me about the design, in more technical terms, about the design of the site and the exterior of the building. You just talked about your design intent, and what kind of materials you used to kind of achieve this abandoned wood
Yeah.
barn look.
Yeah, well, yeah, as you said, it was kind of a foregone conclusion that it was going to be probably wood, and they wanted that softness as a counterpoint to the concrete and everything. Um, so then it was kind of articulating these structural elements as the important thing. So we moved the structure to the outside of the building. Um, Spent a lot of time thinking about how it interfaced with this kind of crisp glass facade. Um, but really trying to manifest that vision of this sort of decaying barn, where we built part of the building and then had this berm of earth come up over the top, like almost like it's been buried or something. So just it was just using wood and detailing in a way that was kind of interesting. I think that again, I really thought that those dynamic forces should be expressed. So like in the barn where the knee braces were really telling the story of those forces, I thought, well, it'd be so cool if the structure here had some story to tell about angles and what angles do to kind of brace things from tipping over. Um, that I mean, there's a certain amount of challenge because it's a somewhat harsh environment on wood over there, but they were really embracing the idea of letting it weather, and they didn't want something that looked brand new to start out with, so it was it's a departure, I think, from the way a lot of sort of more kind of commercial clients would approach a building. I think there's a sort of hominess that they were wanting. Um, so there's a piece of the project, if you look at pictures, that's it's separated from the main building. It's the one that has the earth roof, and that is specifically for 30 people to have lunch in. So once a month they bring the farmers in and serve them lunch. So that we got to build a 30-foot long table, which was really fun. And this room sort of is this little gem that fit in the landscape, and it's all by itself. And it was kind of a neat thing. I thought it sort of told the story of how they feel about the farmers and how they feel about the field people, to bring them in, treat them really well, and kind of, I won't say look, put them on display, but put them in this special spot.
Right.
Uh, so kind of treating each part of the building. It's an L-shaped building, and the main body of the main bar is where most of the business takes place. But they have a sales department that are selling the fruit, and they're really it's almost like a Wall Street kind of situation. They're on the phone, they're kind of yelling, they're like really loud. And so Rick wanted them sort of sequestered off to one side. And so that led to the L shape of the building. And there, we gave them a big glass wall to look into the landscape as well. So I guess what I'm trying to say is just that sort of vision of the metaphor led to a lot of those decisions about materials.
So so all this wood, how is it? I'm just curious because I know it's a harsh environment. How is it treated? I mean, you want it to weather, but obviously you don't want it to rot. What did you do there to
Yeah, so
find that balance?
the structural members are coated with uh, a waterproofing. Um, the siding is not. So the siding was a barn in Idaho somewhere that they found this barn wood. And we brought it and just put it on, and it's just being allowed to weather. And it'll probably get pretty dark. Uh, it's a very dry environment over there. It's 300 days of sunshine a year, so you don't really get a lot of rain. There is snow. Mostly it's sun that works on everything. And so I think there's going to be, to be honest, I think there's going to be a bit of maintenance keeping the structural members, you know, protected. I think they'll have to recoat those a fair amount, but um, the roof is a Corten roof. It's kind of a live finish. So, those kind of materials that are intended to kind of look like they're decayed, I think they'll do just fine. Um, so,
I I love that you actually repurposed an actual barn for the siding. It's not just some product that you bought. Not that buying products is a bad thing, but you actually got siding from a barn to kind of fit in with that whole kind of mission of what you were trying to create. I did not, I don't, if I read it, I don't recall reading that. So that surprised me when you said that. That's amazing.
yeah, the contractor found that material and brought it to the table, and the owners loved it. They loved the idea of that. Well, the story one, but also just the kind of, it's going to tell a story over time, right?
Tell me about, before we talk about the interior spaces of the building, tell me about the laminated wood buttresses.
Yeah, so those members are so big that, well, it would have been really wonderful to use just solid timbers. You just can't get those, not in those lengths and sizes. And it's not necessarily that all that sustainable to do that anyway. So we ended up using glulams. And because the owner wasn't so excited about seeing the laminations of the glulams, especially down on the columns, if you look at the building, you'll see that the big columns come down and then they have like a 2x8 on each side. So it makes this kind of shape in section. But mostly that was done, well, it has two purposes. One, it was done to cover the laminations so that the whole thing doesn't look like a glue lamp. And then secondly, as they go up, they serve a purpose of kind of how the beams or the trusses nest on top of the column. They're kind of a side plate that holds those in place. So that worked out pretty well because you don't walk around there going, well, these are all glue lamps. You can tell when you look up and see the trusses, but it looks like dimensional lumber. And then that shape, those sort of idea of these paired columns that almost look like a pair of legs walking. That sort of they twist as they go up and down. That was just literally trying things out with pieces of wood and sticks, and you know, talking with the engineers because obviously that's not an easy thing to calculate. Like I don't.
Right.
They love trying to figure out how the forces go through there, but they did, and I think there's something kind of dynamic about that people really like. And again, it gets back to that metaphor.
Those are the kinds of things we love to talk about because it's problem solving at its finest.
Mm.
How do you take something you have and get it to where you want it to go, and what you want it to be, and those if if we shared more of those things in the industry, I think all of our work would get a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
let's talk about the interior of the building. I love the big, bright, open spaces. Tell me about some of the unique spaces or elements on the interior of the building and what types of materials you use there to achieve that vibe, or why you did the
Mm-hmm.
things you did.
Well, the why is a good question because that gets back again to Mr. Platt, and he he didn't want any columns, so that resulted in those big trusses that you see. If you look at the interior images, you'll see that the roof framing is these. They're site-built trusses that are a pair of glue lams coming together, and then kind of a bowstring. I think they call it a king post in the middle out of steel, and then these rods, these tension rods. And so that allowed us to span the whole width of the building without any columns. Um, and that was all, those were not a product. That was something that our engineer, designed with all these connections, and they're all made out of metal, really kind of neat. And so, I think that the desire to keep a column free led to these, wonderful trusses where you're really seeing the forces at work here. And that was very consistent with what was happening outside with these columns and things. So it became a really wonderful, I think, kind of really what makes the building. The other thing is that he didn't want to see any devices. And if you look at the pictures, you will not see any lights in the ceiling. You won't see any smoke detectors. You won't see any devices, no sprinkler heads, nothing. No vents, no ducts. You don't want to see anything. So, it's this big open volume, and that's because he wanted it that way. And so the building is actually on a raised floor system, one of those pedestal floor systems, and I think 4 feet below these tiles that lay out the whole floor, and all of the utilities are running underneath. So it's a concrete crawl space and then this raised floor. So everything, we could get almost everything underneath there, and he wanted flexibility. He wanted to be able to move desks around and change the utilities. The other thing is that he would talk about how in their old office, half of the staff wanted the heat on and half of them wanted it off. And this way you can have these little diffusers at your desk that you can turn on or off or adjust a little bit. There's a little bit of personal adjustment as the air comes up through the floor, which is, that makes everybody a lot happier. So it was just an effort to keep it as clean as possible. I mean, he wanted total tranquility in this space. And so, quiet had to be very quiet. We spent a lot of time with acoustical engineers, trying to figure out how to just diffuse all the sound. So it's all carpeted. Up between the trusses on the roof is a sound deadening board with fabric wrap on it. We put fabric on the cubicles. The only things that we didn't do any kind of sound masking like white noise. Didn't really want to go that far with it. And we could have raised the cubicles up higher and had more acoustic material, in between people. But, that, of course, kind of runs counter to this big, wide open space and being able to see everything. So, and then the only rooms that are in there, really, they float like little boxes underneath the big, giant roof. There's, conference rooms are just kind of glass boxes, and other spaces are just, they float, inside that big structure. So it does feel very open and kind of free of things.
So how they keep it quiet from the sales department, the Wall Street of produce?
Yeah, there's a glass partition between them. Yeah, you really wanted them separate, and I want glass. So yeah, they're in there, and everybody else is out here, and so we wanted it.
A number of years ago, I had the opportunity at a conference I was attending to tour the plant for one of those raised floor systems.
Cool.
And I was blown away by that. And that was the first time I had ever, I'd heard things, but it's the first time I'd ever actually really seen it in action. And the flexibility it gives you to get all of those things out of your way and get at them still easily. Mm-hmm. If you have a problem, that was a mind blower for me. And I couldn't figure out why more people weren't doing it all the time.
Yeah, I mean, we as architects spend so much of our effort and time managing stuff, managing mechanical systems, managing sprinkler heads, managing, wiring and all that, ductwork and everything, it kind of takes a lot of that out of the equation, which was wonderful. It's the only time I've ever used one, but I loved it. It was fantastic. And they have enough density, enough weight to them that you don't feel like you're walking on you don't really sense it so much with your feet. It's pretty cool.
Do you recall the name of the system you used?
I think it was made by Hayworth.
Okay.
There was a specific name.
Somebody's going to email me and ask me that question after you talked about it. So I figured we'll just answer it now.
I think I put it in the list of vendors that you asked me for.
Perfect. Um, can you tell me about one particular notable design challenge that you faced and how you solved it? Basically, take my listeners to school and teach them something.
Well, I'm going to stick with what we were just talking about. So you've got this space, and you can't have anything in the ceiling, and it's a office building. So how do you handle lighting? Um, and I think that one of the great successes of the project was, managing daylight. And because I grew up there, I know that sun is not your friend in Yakima. So, if you think of the diagram of the building, the south face has just little tiny windows in it. They're not tiny, but smaller windows. Um, the north side is just a big glass wall. And then the L shape where the salespeople are, that's faces west, and all the mechanicals put on the west side. So because west sun is just the worst in Yakima, you just don't want west sun. So we turned our back on that, tried to face the other way, and tried to get daylight to do as much of the work as possible. Um, and I think that's one of the things that makes the space feel really good. The other thing is then, well, okay, you got to have some artificial lighting. You got to have some. So how do we do that? And it really turned out to be a wonderful opportunity. So we did a lot of custom lighting. I got to design a lot of really cool custom fabrications that a local metalworker over there did. And the main lighting is done by what we call street lights. And so there are these sort of trees that go up with these arms, and they have LED lighting that shines up on the ceiling. Well, the ceiling's up there like 17 feet or something. And so to get the bounce, we were out there at night with the lighting designer kind of trying to tweak the height of these things. Didn't want them too tall, but wanted to get enough light up there. And then, we did a lot of fabrications for, kind of lamps and brackets and things for lights. So, what started out as a real challenge, turned out to be kind of a wonderful opportunity to put jewelry on the building. Like have these really finely made metal pieces that are kind of sprinkled around the building that provide the artificial lighting. Uh, so that was a bit of a challenge in this case to get good
A,
illumination without
a
without it,
bit.
without seeing where it's coming from.
I was, as you were talking about that raised floor system and hiding everything under there, I'm glad that's the way you chose to answer that question, because I'm like, you can't hide light fixtures in the floor. So where are the light fixtures? I
Yeah,
mean, you can hide a lot of stuff down there, but you have to have some light, obviously, no matter how bright and light the building is. But what a fantastic way to solve that problem. Maybe it doesn't always have to be an actual part of the building, so to speak.
yeah, yeah.
So I imagine you can move these things around as well if you
Yeah,
do different
the
things.
main street lights we call them, they're bolted to the partitions and the cubicle system. So, they can be kind of plugged and unplugged and moved around. And that's again back to your comment about the raised floor. Yeah, that those power drops real easy to do. Yeah.
What about sustainability? Not everybody pursues actual like lead points or those kinds of things, but pretty much everybody really looks pretty hard at sustainability in one way or another in their buildings these days. Did you do anything in particular for this project to make it more
Well,
more sustainable?
the biggest thing was really back to the site planning and the location and the orientation of all the glass, and where we put glass and where we didn't put glass, and how we managed the hot sun. I think, keeping the building cool was a high priority. So, I think that was probably the biggest thing, was trying to make it so that we didn't need, much supplemental lighting. We weren't really just dumping all kinds of energy into cooling the building, because we're trying to keep the you know, just by zoning it, that the daylight was where it needed to be. It's also it's a timber building. I mean, everybody's moving to you know timber, mass timber construction. That wasn't necessarily the goal with this. I think it's more about its feeling as a material to sort of be close to. Uh, but we did end up, doing almost everything out of wood. We used SIPS panels for the roof, so you know, it's kind of a very low pitch roof, and much of it faces south, so you can imagine how much heat gain that roof would take, and keeping it cool. So, uh, there's just a lot of continuous insulation on the roof because of the SIPS system, and that actually was nice because it was fairly easy to install. It's not a real high building, so they could do it with forklifts and went on real fast. So that I think those I would say those are the biggest moves. Trying to deal with cooling and trying to deal with daylight.
I can imagine in Yakima, I can imagine cooling was a high priority. And was that part of what drove putting the I'm not sure what you call the space, but the lunch hall for the farmers, was that part of the drive of kind of putting it in the berm to
Yeah,
keep it
well,
cooler?
yes, and it does, because having earth on the roof really does keep it much cooler, and then it's got concrete in the back, so it's got a kind of a nice flywheel for the mass back there. It's also because it's separated and it's only used rarely. That little piece can be left unconditioned, I mean, or they can let the temperature fluctuate in there, so it allows them to take that extra, I don't know how many square feet out of the equation. I'll tell you one other. You said just to get into technical things. Another reason why that is set apart is because the owners didn't want sprinklers, um, and this is a Type 5 building. We built that L shape, the main bar of the building, right to the max of what you can do without. It's 17,500 feet or something like that without sprinklers, and so that little lunchroom is technically a separate building. You don't touch. So that was part of what drove that as well. But it turned out to be a cool thing. If you look at our pictures, there's a picture of a horse up there on top of the building, standing on the lunchroom.
But I would imagine that the farmers and the people that are invited to that lunch feel kind of special though because of that. If that's what it's mainly used for, this space, somebody thought about us
Yeah,
when creating this space just for us.
yeah. I
And
actually attended one of those, and it's really neat. It's really neat to see the interaction of the office people with the farm people, the field people, and yeah, I just thought that was a wonderful thing that they do.
I do as well. I mean, what a great lesson in empathy and in thinking outside of just the bottom dollar and building relationships. We talk about that in this industry all the time. It's all about the relationships. And I think business in general could use more of that. So I love that lesson in that space.
There are also some kind of hot desks in the main building for guys who are field workers who don't really have an office or a computer. They can come in and just plug into a little hot desk and do whatever they need to do, which is pretty cool too.
Oh, that's what makes the best business, right?
Hmm.
Thinking not only about your customers, but about all of the people you work with and what's going to make everybody work more efficiently and work better together. Um, so, in any project, the construction phase is always loaded with lessons learned. It doesn't matter how well you design your building, things just happen. It's the nature of this business. And we love to hear construction stories. So, was there anything that you would be willing to share with us that came up during construction that required some problem solving or was unexpected,
Hmm.
that maybe required a pivot or a change in what you originally planned to do? um, construction's always fun. There's
I
something.
know. That's why I love the construction phase because that's where the learning happens. That's in my career. I've learned everything during construction. It's just where you learn. I would say that it's kind of a subject of when you're doing something really unique. When you're doing columns that aren't straight up, but they're at an angle and then they're twisted and all that. And, the big, huge structural members are they're just one-off designs and they have to be built on site. And this nowadays, I think if this was done today, there'd be a lot of digital fabrication, and I know that there's a lot of timber rights that use modeling and 7-axis CNC machines, and they can get the whole thing like a puzzle that just pops together on the site. We didn't. Our contractor wasn't what was happening back in those days, and that's just not how they roll, because they don't really do. This is one of the few commercial buildings they've ever done, but they did a fabulous job. So how do we do this? And then it's kind of like, okay, we've got all these big huge pieces of wood. Now how are we going to get them up there? And how do we brace these wacky things? And like the big trusses, they're so huge, and they're is like, well, they were wondering, do we build them on the ground and try to lift them up? Do we put them up there and not tilt them up? Do we just try to put them together as individual pieces in place? And we spent a fair amount of time talking about different ways to do that. They ultimately decided that they would build it in place. And so if you think of this big, gable-shaped volume running, 100 and some feet in, just continuously, they decided that they would build a wall down the middle, a temporary wall, to shore this up. And it was a very tall wall. I think it's like 17 feet, and it ran the whole length of the building. And what that allowed them to do was to take the timbers and set them on this wall, and then they would put in the big king post, and then they would put in the tension rods, these big 1-inch rods with turnbuckles, right? And they take the tension, and the timbers take the compression, and that big post, holds it all together. And then there's intermediate bracing, kind of X bracing, that takes the whole bloody thing and keeps it from tipping over. And they said, okay, well, this is what we're going to do. So they put this wall down the middle. They set these things up. They ran the rods through the wall, got them all in place, and they said, when we kick this shoring wall out of here, we're going to have you and the structural engineers standing underneath it. So do you believe in your design? And we want you to stand there when we kick this wall out. And we're like, okay, we'll do that. And the rods were kind of just hanging there. They hadn't really tuned them yet. You almost tune this thing like a piano, right? Like a bridge or something. And the owner was going to be coming through, and they thought, doesn't look good that they're sagging. He might think something's wrong, So they said, well, let's just flatten them out by turning the turnbuckle. And they just started turning these things, and all of a sudden the whole thing popped up off the temporary wall. So it was already, even with just that little bit of tension in those bottom cord members, it was fine. It didn't even need that shoring wall anymore. So they couldn't torture us. It was all working perfect.
I think that would maybe freak me out just a little bit. You're not, you're prepared for when you're going to knock out that shoring wall. You're not prepared for it, tightening things up to all of a sudden pop up.
Yeah.
And not be, supported by that anymore.
Yeah.
You got to have some faith in your design to do that, though.
It was a wonderful triumph for our structural engineer.
I bet. That'd be a sigh of relief. I know that much.
Yeah. Just various unique things about the design, and just unique things about the design that we like, so you have to figure out how to build them. And I kind of take this personal feeling that if I can't build it myself, I don't ask the contractor to. So I do a lot of sort of mock-ups and models and things to figure out how these things can be built before we've asked them to do so. I don't know. We in our office, we're very, very hands-on. We both, my partner Jim and I, we've always over the years been building things, and we built actually on Washington Fruit. The project manager and myself built light fixtures, and so if you look in the room that's where the salespeople are, you'll see these. They're sort of like a cylinder, black steel cylinder that hangs down off these rods from the ceiling, and we built those for the project. Just one, to kind of get our hands on, have a little imprint on there, and two, save a little money.
How lovely to have a client that is open-minded enough to, do some unique things and and allow things like letting you build some light fixtures for the facility. I'm curious. So I'm familiar with the area. Uh, you know, I don't, not super familiar. I don't think Yakima's super close to a big city. And typically, when you're doing projects that are a little bit more remote, you can run into, I'm going down a rabbit hole, by the way. Um, you can run into challenges during construction in, oftentimes there'll be really small contractors or really small subcontractors in areas like that, challenges to get the skilled labor you need for what is a bigger project than they might typically do around there on a daily basis. Did you have any challenges with that paired with the unique construction?
Not too much. It's sort of funny. This particular contractor, Artisan Construction, they're just wonderful, and they a lot of the people that are the trades, their major sub trades are relatives. And so, I think the excavator is also the painter, and you know, I know that the electrician is like a cousin or something. So, they actually were able to just about answer any need. We did find just a wonderful metal worker in Yakima who does work he built all those light fixtures that I was talking about. He's every bit as skilled a metal worker as we have here in Seattle. And Seattle's just, as you know, just we have the best in the world. So that was wonderful to not have to bring, because we're very often when we're working other places, we're bringing our own metalwork, we're bringing our own precast concrete, our own art glass, because we have here in Seattle we have the best craftspeople anywhere. So we do find ourselves shipping stuff to places that are out of town. But I will say, in the case of Washington Fruit, we really didn't. The only thing was the casework came from Seattle, but that was more because the owner had a relationship with somebody here. Um, that was really the only thing I can really think of that came very far away.
Well, I imagine that saved a fortune on the project as well, not having to, because often more remote projects, the further you have to bring things in, the more it's going to cost. It's just the way it is.
Hmm.
So, how Artisan Construction, you said it's the name of the construction company. When you mentioned that, I was like, okay, yeah, they probably, with a name like that, they had to embrace the unique
Yeah, right.
construction and
They got something to live up to with a name like that.
absolutely. But what a great thing now to add to their completed projects list. So, looking back on this project in particular, what wisdom did you gain that will make the next project that you do like this even better?
Um, I think that probably, well, one thing was I talked a lot about, dealing with light and heat and orientation. I thought we did a really good job of that, but because we focused a lot on the west sun, there's no openings on the west side, right? So it's just, completely protected in that way. But what we kind of missed a little bit was the east, the morning sun heat up, because in the morning it gets kind of hot in the sales area, and just hadn't taken the morning sun as seriously probably as we should have. That was a surprise. And then the other thing too is I just think the detailing on some of those wood elements give maybe a little bit more longevity. We put like metal caps on top of all the wood members that are exposed and tried to really cover the end grain in every case and do those things. But, it's probably something that you can't do too good a job of, right? You can't do too good a job of protecting exterior wood. And, I'd like to, as I move forward through these things, think about that a little bit more.
So, what is your personal favorite thing about this building?
Um, I think it's really how it sits in the landscape. I think that it really looks like it belongs there. There's pictures in the photographs I've sent you. where you kind of see this building in the field, and then there's the roof, and then there's the basalt cliffs, and it all just kind of looks like it just is one thing. And I take a certain amount of pride in that. I was, really wanting to bring some good world-class architecture to my hometown. And, we've done 4 or 5 projects there. And I think if you look at that body of work, I feel really good about how it feels like it's of the place. It's of Yakima. I feel like we're almost establishing kind of a vernacular sort of architectural style for the valley. And I think we did a very good job of building something that really fits the landscape it's in. That's probably my favorite thing.
Yeah, well, you did well, and what's happening in this business is also of Yakima and of the area. So I have to admit, when we were first, looking at having this interview, and I went to look at the project, what I saw was not what I expected to see.
Mm-hmm.
When I just read, that it's this fruit and produce company, um, I had to go look at it before I said, yeah, this sounds like a fun interview, because I'm like, that's, I know what I pictured it to be. This just like the other things, very industrial, warehousey. I'm like, okay, what are we going to have to talk about here? I need to go look at this thing before we decide to do this. And you achieved exactly what you tried to achieve. It
Yeah, and
does. It's a
I really
beautiful
want,
setting. And it
thank you. I
fits.
want to credit the owner for that. I think that, again, it goes back to his vision. And, I probably, left to my own devices, would have done something with more concrete and steel. Uh, I love those materials. But because of, what they wanted, and it turned out very different. Different than what I would have ever imagined too. So, got to give him the credit for that, because he really guided it, and with very few words. It's wonderful.
Gotta love that.
Hmm.
So, what can we look forward to coming from Grandbaba going forward? What are you working on now? What do we get to see next? Because I'll be calling you back, just so you know.
Okay, cool. Please do. Well, one of the things that we're working on, that we've been working on for a few years now, is um, out in Woodinville. There's a farm and garden, or not farm, a garden center called Molbach's, and it's been there for over 50 years. It was there before Woodinville. It was even a town, and it's several generations of nursery people. But what's there now is this garden center store retail that is very beloved in the region. It's people know that the family and that store come from all over to go there. It's on a 20-acre site in downtown Woodinville, so the city built up around this, and it's a pretty valuable piece of land for that use. So what we are doing is we are trying to envision sort of garden centers of the future, and we're trying to take this business that's on 20 acres of land and shrink it down to 128,000 square feet on the ground level of a multi-use, mixed-use building. So there'll be like 400 units of housing on the same site as the garden center, and a restaurant. So it's a very challenging project to take something that usually takes a lot of square footage of ground space, and reconfigure it and reimagine it into this smaller, more urban, with other buildings, not necessarily right above it, but almost above it. And that's, one of the challenges, of course, is that these plants need light. You can't put them in the basement, you can't put them in a box. So, we're trying to figure that one out. So that's the greater project that has all the housing in it is already started. In a few years, the garden center will start. So that's pretty cool. Been very interesting to work with. Wonderful people. If you know Seattle, one of the sort of iconic things that people who've lived here for a long time might remember is that right across from the Seattle Art Museum is this place called the Lusty Lady, and it was kind of this, you take your quarters and go in there, and there's a peep show thing. And they had this incredible marquee, and the marquee always had something kind of fun on it. I think I can talk about this. A client bought it and wants to do sort of a private art museum in there. So as a very sort of urban project, we're working on that one. Doing a lot of residential projects and back to doing some restaurants. So yeah.
I love this garden center project. I happen to have I live in the Forest Heights area of Portland, so my backyard is a forest. Even though this is urban, I mean, I can 10 minutes, I'm in downtown Portland.
Cool.
And there's a little garden center, nowhere near that scale, but a little garden center right 2-minute drive from my house. And they have a little restaurant, and you can go in there and have brunch and mimosas and look at all their plants. And then they have a couple of little buildings there that you can go for gardening supplies and things like that. And I just recently went there for the first time for brunch, and I just loved it because it's in a house that used to, be a residential home. The restaurant is, but they have this big outdoor area among the plants. And it was just, in the city, this just kind of beautiful little oasis. And another way that the garden center, because obviously those places are a lot less busy in the wintertime.
Mm-hmm.
Another way that they can, have revenue
Mm-hmm.
and stay in existence. But I've lived here for 3 years now, and I've driven by that place a million times and had no idea. And now it's a new favorite.
Yeah.
So yeah, I imagine that's going to be pretty cool.
It's that customer experience that you're talking about that we're really focused on. I think it's probably why we were brought in on the project, because yeah, you want to make it a destination for more reasons than just picking up a plant, and we've looked at examples all over the world, and it's particularly in the UK. They have these huge garden centers, and some of them have grocery stores in them. And it's, they've really taken it to quite an extreme in terms of the experience and all the activities that you can do. So
I would love to see more of that.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to go do my shopping at a garden center as opposed to a box grocery store any day of the week. So, well, let me know when you're doing one in my neighborhood.
Okay. All right.
So I usually close out the podcast with at least one broad industry question before my final question. Just to get a feel for what you think about the industry in a particular area. So my question today for you is 10 years from now, what do you envision will be the biggest change in architecture and how we work? I mean, we know there's a ton of things going on right now in the industry. Which one do you think is going to be the most notable, or what new thing maybe that none of us have thought of yet?
I think there's a couple things. I'm imagining that, well, right now, I think, doing things digitally is just changing the way we work, like just day to day. Now you don't necessarily go out and measure a building anymore. You send out people that have these crazy laser camera things that go in and create a big, huge point cloud or whatever, and then that somehow is translated into a model, like a Revit model. And, and then now we have digital fabrication. So, these models inform other models, and then those models, move the tools around and make the thing. And I feel like that's just going to continue to go crazy. And are we even going to have a role anymore? Because artificial intelligence is going to design the building, all these machines will do it and we don't even need to be involved. I don't know. But I find it pretty cool, like what you can do now, like just about anything you can, like dream up, like Washington fruit. Like I said, if we did that now, those parts would be fabricated by robots, and it would have been all come out of a crazy digital model. And I think that's really cool because, the tools always inform the architecture, right? So when we had the 30, 60, 90 triangle and the 45 triangle, back in the 70s, then that's the only angles you saw in buildings. And now, whatever your brain can dream up, some machine can make it. And I can't even imagine in 10 years what that's going to be. It just blows my mind to even think about it. And it's exciting. I love it. I think it's so cool. So I think that's going to change the way we work a lot. Um, and I think in 10 years, we're still going to be trying to figure out how architecture can help with the whole problem of, climate change. That's a focus, and a lot of people are serious about it and really focused, and that's cool, but, we're still dealing with kind of a lot of tried and true methods and materials and, industries and things that are slow to, it's hard to change. It's hard to change these things. Hard to change how we make concrete and stuff like that, or how we move materials. So I think in 10 years, we're still going to be working on that. And, hopefully successfully, hopefully we will make a difference, because I think architects want to.
Well, this podcast is a fairly new thing for me. We've been doing this for about 17 months, and 61 interviews in, I've had just this amazing opportunity to talk to architects from all over the world, actually. And I recently had an interview about, they call it Home of Hope in Armenia, where they did exactly what you're talking about with technology. They basically drew up what they needed and prefabricated this kit of parts of light gauge steel framing for a family that had been living in a shipping container since the 80s in Armenia. And they were, because not just climate change, but we also, living in Seattle, just like I know living in Portland, the problems for those that don't have homes and, a place, that are falling on hard times. And with our economy, sometimes I'm worried we're going to even have more of that. They were able to build this home for so much less. And that was the first test home. Now they're going to build more over there for more of these people that have, they're working. This particular family has this little farm, and have a real home. I mean, they have no running water in this shipping container, and this is something that's manageable to get people into homes. And we all know what that does for people in every other area of their life to, they just feel better. They're more motivated. They do better things in their country. But just a fascinating interview and how they made all this happen. And then use local contractors that learned some lessons along the way too, because the architects went over to Armenia and actually helped do the framing of the house that they modeled. And then I forgot exactly how they fabricated it, but I'm hearing stories like this in all different arenas. More every, we tend to stay in our little bubble in our firms, and you don't always get exposure. And that's part of the motivation of this podcast, is to have all of these really cool things people are doing and innovative ideas or way they solve problems get shared more widely. So somebody else, I know somebody's gonna, I've heard enough things already. I know somebody's going to listen to this episode today and they're going to go, oh, I never thought of that. Or, oh, I wonder if I can make that go work with this. So, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I can't even imagine what things are, just watching how much they've changed just in the last 10 years, what they're going to look like 10 years from now. I think it's going to be pretty exciting.
Yeah. The tools we'll have, it'll be amazing.
So you get one final question. Everybody on this podcast gets this question. So as human beings, we all hope that our presence and actions in this life will result in some kind of positive impact on the world, which that might mean our world around us, maybe not the whole world. I've had to qualify this for people. For me, I call those actions or that mission to make a difference my world domination statement. So personal, and that's how I plan to make a difference. Personal or professional, what is your personal world domination statement? How do you hope to make a difference?
Oh, gosh, that's a hard one.
It's
I
not a
mean,
very big question.
I would love to, end world hunger and bring peace to all the countries. I mean, um, I don't know how, but I guess maybe I should figure out how to help. I mean, for me, it's like I'm approaching the end of my career, right? And we have this firm of 30 to 40 people, and they're all really young, and I'm the only old guy or only old person in the office. And my personal mission in the last few years of my career is to focus on mentorship and kind of help people to leave behind what I can. Um, both on the technical side and on the design side. What my passion in architecture is really about the um, creating beauty. It's about proportion and composition and balance and the appropriateness of things in their places, and trying to do it sustainably, and but just creating beauty in a world full of a lot of really banal stuff. And I, like you asked about washing a fruit and what was my favorite thing. Well, part of my favorite thing is just creating that, and I guess that's a little egotistical, but it's to the extent that it improves somebody's lives. I feel pretty good about that. So, I just really want to try to lift this up from the inside. Kind of take the people that I can influence and help them be good architects.
Well, I don't know that
Oh,
there's too many higher callings than that. I do a lot of mentorship myself. And while you may not be that person that changes the whole world, you have no idea what that person you mentored or taught or guided is going to go do with that information that you took the time and care to share with them or to help them. Those ripples go so far beyond anything we'll ever know. And they very well, one of those young people could very well be the one that does some massive thing, and you had a piece of that. So I've never been, my world domination isn't always about big things. It's my world domination is making my world a better place with the things that I'm able to do. So I love that answer. Brett, thank you so much for joining me today on Detailed. This was an amazing conversation. I
oh,
really appreciate you being here.
thank you so much, Cherise. It was fun.
Good. Well, I hope you'll come back. You'll have other projects, and
Okay.
I don't plan on going anywhere anytime soon. So I would love to have you back and talk about another project at another time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.